It didn't start with love. It started with silence and the courage to face it together. He didn't plan to notice her that day. The cafe was just a place to disappear, for walls that didn't ask questions, a window that didn't look back. The kind of place where people come to be alone without having to explain why. He ordered coffee he wouldn't finish and sat in the corner, scrolling aimlessly through his phone, trying to feel less like a mistake that life had quietly swept aside. Then he noticed her. She sat near the window, sunlight spilling gently across her table, making the faint lines around her eyes look almost like brushstrokes. Proof of a life actually lived. There was a book open in front of her, but she wasn't reading it. Her gaze drifted somewhere far away, caught between memory and distance. Every few seconds, her thumb traced the rim of her coffee cup, slow and absent-minded, like someone trying to remind themselves they were still here. He couldn't name what drew him in. It wasn't beauty in the usual sense. It was something quieter, heavier. She looked like someone who had learned how to live with silence, maybe even made peace with it, and somehow that made him want to speak. Their first exchange was nothing extraordinary, a polite nod, a small smile, a brief comment about the weather. But there was something in the way she looked at him when she responded, steady, calm, unhurried. Most people look at you to reply. She looked to understand. Her voice carried that low, mature warmth that only comes from someone who's been both hurt and healed by time. When she left, he found himself staring at the empty chair across from her. The faint scent of her perfume lingered, something floral, faintly nostalgic, and it stirred something he hadn't felt in a long while, awareness. Not attraction exactly, but a recognition that he wasn't the only one walking around quietly broken. That night, he couldn't stop thinking about her, not because she was mysterious, but because she felt real. No pretense, no effort to be anyone but who she was. He realized, with a quiet ache, that maybe he had forgotten how to be that honest with himself. The next morning, he returned to the cafe, telling himself it was just for the coffee. But as the bell above the door chimed and he saw her sitting there again, gazing out the same window, he understood something deeper. Healing doesn't always begin with courage. Sometimes it begins with recognition, when one broken soul quietly notices another and decides, without words, not to look away. The second time they spoke wasn't planned either. It began with something small, a passing comment about the book she always carried, the one she never seemed to read. She smiled faintly and said, "Sometimes I just need something to hold, not something to finish." It was the kind of answer that lingered longer than it should have. From that moment, their conversations began to take shape, soft, unhurried exchanges over coffee that somehow made time feel slower. She asked questions differently. Not the usual, "What do you do?" or "Where are you from?" Instead, she asked, "What makes you feel at peace?" He had no answer at first. He wasn't used to people asking questions that reached that deep. Her presence had a calming gravity. She carried herself with quiet confidence, every gesture deliberate, every word chosen with care. She didn't try to fill silences, she let them breathe. When she laughed, it wasn't loud or performative. It was the kind of laughter that comes from someone who hasn't done it in a while and is still remembering how. And when she smiled, it felt undeservedly warm, like sunlight touching a part of him he'd kept hidden. He began to notice details, the small scar near her wrist, the silver ring she twisted when she was lost in thought, the way her eyes softened when she listened. These tiny human things made her feel real, tangible, not someone out of reach, but someone grounded in her own quiet strength. Sometimes she spoke about life like it was something to rebuild piece by piece, not with grand plans, but with daily kindness. She mentioned she'd started over recently, one honest day at a time, she said, as if honesty was a kind of therapy. That sentence rooted itself in his mind, echoing long after she left. He began to show up more often, pretending it was coincidence, but deep down he knew better. The cafe had become their unspoken meeting place, familiar, yet fragile. When she wasn't there, the space felt different, emptier. When she was, even the air felt warmer. He didn't know what this connection was yet. Friendship, fascination, or something unnamed. All he knew was that her presence steadied him in a way nothing else had in months. She didn't demand to know his pain. She simply gave him space to exist beside hers. And in that quiet companionship, in the way she listened, in the pauses that followed her words, he felt the faint beginning of something he hadn't known he was missing. Peace. Not from the world, but from himself. It happened on an ordinary evening. The kind of moment that doesn't announce its importance until much later. The cafe was closing early because of the rain, and she was struggling to fit several old boxes into her car. He offered to help without thinking, and she accepted with a tired smile that carried both gratitude and hesitation. The boxes were heavier than they looked, filled with the weight of another life. When they finished, they stood by her car, both reluctant to leave. The rain softened to a drizzle, wrapping the world in that tender hush only storms can leave behind. The scent of wet asphalt mixed with the faint lavender of her perfume, grounding him in the present moment. One that felt strangely fragile, as if it could vanish if either of them spoke too loudly. She leaned against the car, arms crossed, eyes distant. "It's strange," she said softly, "how hard it is to throw away the past, even when you know it's time." He hesitated, then admitted, "I know what you mean. I've been carrying things I should have let go of years ago." She turned to look at him then, really look. Her expression softened, and for a heartbeat, neither of them were strangers. They were simply two people standing in the rain, exposed not by weather, but by honesty. She opened one of the boxes, revealing old photographs and folded letters. "These," she said, touching them gently, "used to mean everything. Now, they just remind me who I tried too hard to be." Her voice trembled slightly, and he felt a quiet ache rise in his chest. Not pity, but recognition. He told her about his own past, the relationship that ended not in anger, but in exhaustion. How love, when held too tightly, can become a mirror of everything you fear losing. She listened, eyes steady, and when he stopped speaking, she said, "Maybe we don't fall out of love. Maybe we just grow out of the versions of ourselves that love once needed." The words hung between them, delicate and heavy all at once. When he handed her the last box, their fingers brushed, a fleeting, electric moment that neither acknowledged, but both felt. It wasn't romantic. It was human, the touch of one person reminding another that they're not invisible. As she drove away, taillights fading into the mist, he realized something simple but profound. Healing didn't require being fixed. Sometimes it only required being understood. And that night, for the first time in a long time, he felt a little lighter. Not because the pain was gone, but because it was finally shared. Over the next few weeks, what began as quiet companionship started to blur into something else, something both of them could feel but neither dared to name. She invited him to help paint her new apartment, claiming she needed an extra pair of steady hands. He agreed too quickly. He told himself it was just to help, but the truth lingered beneath. He wanted to be near her, to see what her world looked like when she wasn't holding herself together. The place smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. Sunlight spilled through half-covered windows, catching the streaks of white in her hair. They painted side by side in comfortable silence, their brushes moving in rhythm. Sometimes their hands brushed when they reached for the same roller, and neither of them spoke about it, though both felt the soft pulse of awareness that followed. At one point, she stood back to look at the wall, a streak of paint across her cheek. He laughed, reaching out instinctively with his thumb to wipe it away, but stopped halfway. She caught the motion, eyes flickering with surprise, then a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. For a moment, everything hung between them. Closeness, hesitation, the impossible question of what this was becoming. That night, after he left, his phone buzzed with a message from her. "Thank you for today. You remind me what it feels like to start over." He stared at the words for a long time, unsure whether to smile or ache. It sounded tender, but final, as if she was already preparing to build a boundary. The next morning confirmed it. When he returned to the cafe, she wasn't there. The next few days turned into a quiet absence. No texts, no chance encounters. And when he finally did see her again, something had shifted. She was polite, distant. Her eyes still softened when she looked at him, but now there was caution behind them. The kind people were when they're trying to protect something fragile. He tried to pretend it didn't matter, that their connection was never meant to be more than brief companionship. But her silence pressed against him in ways words never had. He began to understand that distance doesn't always mean disinterest. Sometimes it's fear, the fear of what might happen if two wounded souls start to depend on each other too much. And yet, every time he caught a glimpse of her, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear or looking out a window lost in thought, that quiet pull inside him refused to fade. It was the kind of longing that didn't demand, just waited, patiently, painfully, hoping she might turn back. That it was late evening when he found her again, by the sea, where the world seemed to slow down long enough for truth to surface. The same cafe lights flickered behind them, but she sat outside, facing the restless waves. Her posture was different this time, shoulders drawn inward, a stillness that spoke louder than sadness. He hesitated before approaching, afraid of saying the wrong thing, afraid of saying anything at all. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red but steady. "I didn't expect you to come," she said quietly. He shrugged, trying to hide the tightness in his chest. "You look like someone who shouldn't be alone tonight." A faint smile crossed her lips, tired, grateful, resigned. "I keep telling myself I'm fine," she whispered, "but healing, it isn't linear, is it? Some days I feel strong, and then one memory drags me right back." Her voice trembled slightly, each word carrying the weight of someone who's spent years pretending she's moved on. He sat beside her, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her shoulder. The ocean roared softly below, wind tugging at their hair. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said. "You never did." Her breath caught. "That's the problem," she murmured. "You see too much. And I don't know if I'm ready to be seen again." She turned her face away, blinking fast, as if holding back tears. He wanted to say something profound, something to make her stay, but instead he just reached out, not boldly, just gently, placing his hand over hers. The warmth between them was immediate, grounding. Her fingers trembled, but she didn't pull away. The gesture said everything words couldn't. "I'm here. I'm not asking for anything. I just don't want you to fall apart alone." Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the waves. Then she whispered, "You make it easy to feel again. That scares me." He looked at her, really looked, at the way moonlight brushed across her face, how fragile and strong she looked all at once. "It's okay to be scared," he said softly. "It means it matters." She exhaled shakily, leaning back, her hand still beneath his. "Maybe," she said after a long pause, "but I've spent so long rebuilding myself. I don't know if I can let someone in without losing pieces again." He wanted to tell her she wouldn't, that he'd protect every piece she gave him. But he stayed quiet, because sometimes healing doesn't come from promises. It comes from presence, from sitting beside someone in the dark and letting them know they're not alone anymore. And under that soft, endless night, something inside both of them began to shift. Not loudly, not suddenly, but with the quiet certainty of trust returning in the days that followed. Something unspoken settled between them. Not avoidance, not tension, but a quiet understanding. They didn't meet every day anymore, and yet, when they did, it felt intentional, like each encounter carried the weight of what wasn't said last time. There was gentleness now, a softer kind of gravity pulling them closer without the need for explanation. One afternoon, she invited him over again, not to paint this time, but to help unpack the last few boxes she hadn't touched since moving in. He noticed how her apartment looked different now. The walls were brighter, the air lighter. She had started filling the empty shelves with books, photos, and small plants that leaned toward the sunlight. It felt lived in, healed. They sat on the floor, sorting through old journals and pictures. Some made her laugh, memories of places she once loved. Others made her fall silent, her fingers brushing the edges of photographs like they were made of glass. He didn't interrupt. He just watched her, the way her face shifted between past and present, strength and sorrow. At one point, She handed him a photo, her younger self, smiling beside someone he knew must have hurt her. "I used to think love meant holding on no matter what," she said quietly. "Now I think it means knowing when to let go." Her voice trembled slightly, but there was peace in it too, the kind that comes when a wound finally starts to close. He nodded, unsure what to say. He wasn't used to this kind of honesty, the kind that didn't demand answers. So instead, he reached out, brushing a strand of hair that had fallen over her face. She didn't move away this time. Her eyes lifted to his, soft and searching. In that moment, words would have only ruined what silence was already saying. They ended up sitting on the couch, the last of the sunlight spilling across the room. Her head found its way to his shoulder, slow, hesitant, but certain. He felt her exhale, long and steady, as if she'd been holding her breath for months. He didn't move, afraid to break the fragile peace between them. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't even a confession. It was something quieter, acceptance. A shared knowing that whatever this was, it had already changed them. The world outside kept moving, unaware that two people inside a small apartment had just found something rare, a calm that didn't demand, a closeness that didn't need to be named. And for the first time, neither of them felt broken anymore. They just felt whole enough to begin again. Months passed, and the edges of their lives began to smooth out. The days no longer revolved around loss, but around quiet progress, small, steady steps towards something that resembled peace. Her apartment, once bare and echoing, now felt alive. The walls glowed in soft shades they had painted together. Framed photos replaced old boxes. The faint scent of coffee and fresh flowers lingered in the air. He came by one afternoon with a small potted plant, a simple gift, but one that seemed to fit perfectly on her kitchen windowsill. She smiled when she saw it, brushing his hand as she took it. "You keep finding ways to make this place feel like home," she said. He smiled back. "You did that yourself. I just reminded you where to start." They spent the day rearranging books, hanging curtains, and filling the last empty spaces that had once echoed with memory. Each small task carried a tenderness that didn't need words. The rhythm between them felt natural now, a balance of presence and space, comfort and quiet affection. When they finally finished, she stood back and looked around. "It's done," she said softly, more to herself than to him. But he could tell it wasn't just the apartment she was talking about. As sunlight filtered through the curtains, she turned to him, that same steady, searching gaze that first caught him months ago. "You've been patient with me," she said. "Most people would have walked away." "I wasn't waiting for anything," he replied. "I just didn't want you to forget how strong you already were." Her expression softened. Without overthinking, she stepped closer, her hand resting against his cheek. It was a small gesture, but it carried everything they had both been holding back: gratitude, affection, and something deeper that didn't need a label. He leaned into her touch, eyes closing for a heartbeat, memorizing the warmth of it. When she finally pulled him into a hug, it wasn't hesitant or fragile like before. It was grounded, a quiet surrender to everything they had both rebuilt together. Neither spoke for a while. Words would have only lessened the meaning of that silence. When they finally let go, there was no declaration, no promises about the future, just mutual understanding. Whatever happened next, they had already given each other something far more enduring than love: the courage to heal and the permission to begin again. As he left her doorway that evening, he turned back once more. She was standing by the window, sunlight behind her, peaceful, whole. And for the first time, he realized that rebuilding yourself doesn't always mean starting over. Sometimes, it means finding someone who helps you remember you were never broken beyond repair.